right, welcome to Make Your Own Fun. I am here with, so excited for this, award-winning poet and founder of the Poetry Lab and author of Makes the Daughter-in-Law Cry from Tebot Bach. I've got Danielle Mitchell here. This is so awesome. Thank you so much. How
There's
you
no
doing?
applause sound effect. I'll
I
just
know, I'm like,
thank you.
so I
Thank you
wanted
for
to tell
having
you, like
me.
right off the bat, this is probably going to make you like roll your eyes, but I was looking at some older work of yours, and I still really enjoy the poem. I think it's called "Quantum of Everything." Do you remember that?
Wow.
Yeah, I think. Well, it was like through the Two Idiots website, right? For
Oh,
Ugly
okay.
Mug.
I was like, how do you have access to that? It's not published.
Oh shit. Oh, so can I not reference that or talk about it or?
No, if I guess if the recording is there and you're
No,
more
no, no. I
familiar
didn't
with
like.
it than
I
I
don't want to
am.
quote lines or anything, but I just wanted to say like I really enjoyed it and I thought it was brilliant and it made me laugh. I almost dropped my coffee, so thank you so much for that. That was great.
That's good. Wow, I should go back to that. I guess I have to return to that poem.
Do you know where what the inspiration for that was in general, or are you not able to talk about it before it releases?
I do remember it very well because I can definitely say that it's a prose poem and that I believe I wrote that before we were doing a reading at the Ugly Mug. It was like poems of resistance. And
Mhm.
so I remember composing that piece and being very angry at the time. Um, and I think that was pre-pandemic,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Yeah, it was. And it was pre-pandemic, pre-pandemic Trump era rage, but it's interesting to look back at a poem like that and be like, wow, everything got so much worse. Right?
Yeah, everybody
Uh,
thought like, oh, this is dog shit. And then when COVID happened, people were like, no, it was already come on.
yeah, I was watching a documentary. I have a thing where I'll watch documentaries on sex cults because I'm really scared that one day it'll be like, whoops, that was I'll end up in one. And so I'm very much like, let's just make sure we're aware of all the possibilities so we don't accidentally end up in this. Because a lot of these people, either they're born into it and they don't know any better, or they like
Right.
accidentally end up in it. And I'm like, how awful. I identify with these women who are just like, whoops, that was a cult. So I watch documentaries
That's
and
a
I was just
great lead
watching
in.
one.
Whoops, that was a
Whoops,
cult.
turns out, right? I mean, I think we can relate to that as like when you're dating someone, you're like, whoops, he was a sadist, or, like, whoops, he was married, or whatever, like he was lying. I mean,
We
we kind
ignore
of,
the red flags at first because, it's
yeah,
new.
we're excited. And, I had a
Pet
lot of
peeve.
calves or
Yeah.
whatever. I mean, there's all kinds of reasons why so I think a cult is like a problematic man, like, uh, you know, in group form.
True.
Mimic
I can see that.
society. I
Yeah.
mean, it's like I think it's a real product of the patriarchy, these sex cults that are so awful. So anyway, I watched a lot of documentaries on them. This was unrelated to the fact that it was a sex cult documentary, but they were going forward in time. So they did like a montage of like 2020 to 2022, and they did, and it was really well done. It was like scrolling, and then they would like pull out like a headline or like a clip from CNN or something and go, and it was like Trump winning, and then pandemic and all the things that went on for the first few years that I mean, wow. And how angry we already were, right? The Women's March, everything going on. And then it was like pandemic coming, pandemic hitting, and then, George Floyd's murder, and then Insurrection Day, and like so many things. And it passed by. And I was like, I was
It was a lot.
more
Yeah.
traumatized from the montage. The documentary was very scary, but then just that montage, it really hit me. And I thought, wow, we have so much trauma from those 2 years, 3 years, that is still unresolved for most of us. Like, we haven't even begun to process that. I took that into therapy, asked my therapist, I was like, I'm traumatized from all. She's like, yeah, we
I
all are.
mean, I mean, it's not like something to laugh at as a personal thing, but just like as an in general thing, because everybody's kind of on the same playing field and dealing with all
Right.
of this crap in the last few years.
Yeah.
Um, but I wanted to change gears because I wanted to kind of get into this because I'm just learning from like the things that you sent me, and we kind of talked about briefly beforehand about the poetry lab, and I kind of wanted to let you, give you kind of like a platform for a few minutes and talk about just so people can know the background when they're watching this, like kind of like how it got started, or maybe more importantly, because I don't think it's something you can really see from the site, of what made you think like I need this, or is there something like this, or how can I bring people together to create something like this?
Gosh, great
I
questions. Thank you.
know.
I'm like, yes. How much time do we have? No, I love that. So the Poetry Lab was started in 2013, and it was originally, well, first of all, let me first say the Poetry Lab, we call it a place in your community to write, read, and collaborate. So we teach online poetry workshops. We gather multiple times a month. And now we also have a book club, which is very exciting. We've always had visiting teaching artists. And also this year we have a feedback circle, which is really exciting because it's an opportunity to get like workshop critique on your poems, as well as have generative spaces for writing. So that's what it is. You can find it at thepoetrylab.com. So it started in 2013 in person in downtown Long Beach. And I just got to do an interview where I got to like write down the whole origin story. And so that was really exciting to kind of go through. And I lived in the story for many days. And I love the story because what had happened was there was a really prominent publisher in Long Beach who had been sort of like the center of the scene for a while. And he had been doing events and all kinds of things, and everybody loved going to his events, and he was moving away. And so everyone in the scene was like, oh, poetry's dead. It's all gone. And these are poets saying this. And I'm like, we're still here, like, and the one guy left. But so I went to a friend of mine not long after that. And I was like, I have an idea. I want to start a poetry thing. And he had just started a co-work space. And so I was like, could we do it in your space? And so I pitched him this idea at a lunch in which he ordered sake bombs. It was a whole thing that I wrote about that in the interview, but it was really funny because at that moment when we're at lunch and he's like, got some sake bombs. I didn't know at the time, but he had already decided. Like the answer was yes, but I didn't know that yet. But I was like, at a business lunch or having, it was really fun. So anyway, that became the Poetry Lab. And that friend was my friend, Marcus D. Manley. And he had this place called We Labs in Long Beach. And that's where we were housed. And we were at We Labs for 8 years, running poetry workshops twice a month. One year we did 3 times a month. And it was really because I wanted to curate spaces for poets, because I was like, well, the scene isn't dead because we all are still here, but also to learn, because I myself could not afford to go back to school and get an MFA. But I really wanted to keep learning about poetry. My undergrad degree was in poetry, but I couldn't continue learning. So I thought, well, if I create the space and I invite the people to come teach, then I can take the class for free because I did all the work to set up the space, right? So that was kind of the whole plan. So I always was a student as well as the sort of the curator of the space. I made it happen, made the event happen. I did the coordinating, whatever. And then I would get out my notebook and take the class along with everybody else so I could learn. And that turned into many, many years of observing what other teaching artists were doing, so that when I started doing it myself, which technically I started doing it right away, but in the beginning I had no idea what I did not want to be a T. I was like, I'm not going to be good at this. But over time, observing them and then trying it myself was really experiential for my learning process and for my teaching process and growing into that. So now at the Poetry Lab, I'm able to like run Zoom classes without too much trepidation and curate a space where we have a team that they get to learn, just like I did, by coming to everything we do and observing and then trying it themselves. They have a safe space to try out their skills as teaching artists. And that I'm really, really proud of that, because for many years, the Poetry Lab was really just me running everything. I worked a full-time job. I didn't have a time to curate the space to accept help. because being a leader and accepting help and like creating pathways for people to help you takes almost just as much effort as like running the thing yourself. Like it's a huge part of the job. So now we have that, and we have actually 11 team members who help me at Poetry Lab.
I saw that. I
It's
was like,
wonderful.
woohoo, getting the team together. So let me interrupt just for a second and just say, or I guess ask, so I wasn't quite clear if there's still a physical location for you guys.
We're 100% online now.
Okay.
We exist
I
in
know
the
you said
rainbow
you left
void.
that space. Okay.
This is my rainbow void.
Okay.
And I invite people into it. So we went virtual for the pandemic, but we've decided because during the pandemic, we met so many people from all over the world,
Mm-hmm.
and the people are just too good. I can't turn away from them. And I prefer it. I'm an introvert. I like staying home. So we're just going to stay in the virtual space.
Gotcha. And I also wanted people to know this is not totally just me blowing smoke your way, but I want people to know that are watching this that I actually have attended when it was in the physical space, and I got a lot out of it. I gotta make sure you lower your cup so you don't do a spit take. But I remember,
Oh God.
I can't remember what one of the prompts were, but I remember oh well, all right. Do I live through anything that can relate to this? I'll just and I remember in the round robin or whatever, like reading this stuff, and I remember reading like the whatever, like 8 or 12 lines or something. I had it out, and people, and you were really polite about it, but like other people were just like, really? And I'm like, yeah. And then I remember like, this is a shit poem. And then I think like 3 to 4 to 5 weeks later, I like came back to it. I'm like, there's something here. There's something here. And I went to a couple of open mics and got some feedback. And I think it was like, I'm not even kidding, like maybe 2 years later, I had like rewritten the thing so it was like unrecognizable from what I started at the lab, but it got published.
Nice.
So it wasn't like um I didn't appreciate the prompt, but it was like I appreciate the fact that without being there and going through that and that nervous thing of like, well, I don't want to share this. This is not even like this is like an amoeba. This isn't even like anything yet. But like I said, I'll blow some smoke your way and you can appreciate that because it is difficult for somebody like me who I just do everything at home and then I'll go out when I feel like, okay, it's gotten to at least that like 80-90% where I might still be kind of like cherry picking some words. But I think it's really awesome and brave and honest what you guys do there. And I've had like Kelsey on the podcast and she's a badass. I'm like, my God, the things that she makes, like, oh my God, like
Yeah.
to related to what she's working on. But also wanted to tell folks, and this is hard for me to admit, but I want to say,
Let's get into it, Eric. Admit it.
right. Let me just. I'm already like kind of on a couch,
There
but
you go. Yeah.
so I think it was one of the events in Long Beach that James Palacio used to host. He had like that blue penguin thing. He used to host a reading, and I remember I had kind of heard you read some stuff, or maybe it's some Right Bloody events, but and then I remember at that event you got up and read a 3 or 5 poem set, and I remember sitting there going like looking back through like the 10 or something that I brought or a notebook, and I was like, fuck, I have to follow that. Yeah, and then I was like, okay, I'm not gonna do that one. That one's gonna die of death. Nope, she did something. Nope, I can't. Nope. And I remember just kind of going up there and doing a couple things and improvising some stuff. But yeah, you blew me away. You're awesome. Just wanted to kind of blow some more smoke that direction. But so I also wanted to kind of give folks kind of like a little bit of a discourse, I guess, if you could talk, because I know on the site, on the Poetry Lab site, you guys talk about events in the community and open mics. So if you could maybe speak for a little bit about how you guys kind of coordinate that from the Poetry Lab and let people know kind of it, maybe just more in the Long Beach area. I'm not quite sure, or you guys cover like all of LA in terms of that kind of stuff.
We work with people all over Southern California. One of my favorite things is to bring in people from outside the Southern California community and be like, but this poet is amazing.
Right.
It's a harder sell, I think, because I think people around the country underestimate the size and breadth of the Southern California poetry scene, and how, because in New York, it just seems like smaller, not in the sense of like fewer people, but just like a smaller area to cover.
Oh yeah,
Whereas
yeah.
California
Everything had to
is huge.
build up.
Yeah, and it's huge, and it takes, one of the disadvantages of being in person in downtown Long Beach was the commute time to get there. I mean, there's a lot of people who'd be like, Poetry Lab, I really wanted to go last week, but like Thursday night traffic, it was not possible. And I'm like, I get it. Like sometimes it's hard for me, and I just had to walk a few blocks, together. I'm like, I get it. But still, in the Southern California, we are based. So I still live I live in the San Gabriel Valley in Southern California, not in Long Beach anymore, but that's where all my friends are. That's where my life is kind of. So we love to kind of prioritize that, because a lot of the team members, not all, but a lot of the team members are based, like Kelsey, you mentioned, is based in that area. And really, the Poetry Lab is about a community, and we really mean it. So what's interesting about Poetry Lab is that we started in 2013. So, and this is our 10-year birthday actually this year, but it's, we're also like a baby, brand new, because, and I say that because we changed. When I started Poetry Lab, it was not like a business or a nonprofit. It was really almost like a club, like anyone who's run an organization that has like a big heart, but no real infrastructure. But we were consistent, and we just kept going and going, because I was like, I will not stop, that sort of like tenacity in me. I was like, I'm not going to quit this. So I'm just going to keep going. But in 2021, we did become a business, and now Poetry Lab is my full-time job. I transitioned away from working a day job and doing Poetry Lab. That's how I have the capacity to have a team and to do all that we're doing. So we're starting really over again from zero, basically. We have like 10 years of community, and that's the one thing we do have. We have 10 years of community members and memories and time spent and investment in our community. But in terms of all the rest of it, it's all like in its infancy. Like we're building a mailing list, and we're figuring out what our programming is going to be, and how we're going to pay people and all of that stuff. And so that's really fascinating. I'm figuring out how to be a writer and a business founder, because right now Poetry Lab has sort of taken over, and I haven't really written a poem myself, except for in our classes, but I haven't gone back to anything. Someone the other day on the team was like, oh, I taught a workshop in August, and I love that poem you wrote, Danielle. And I was like, what? I was like, you did? Cool. That's what they were like. I really want a copy of it for something I'm doing. And I'm like, okay, yeah, I'll find it. And I couldn't find it. I eventually did. Like, yeah, I was like, oh God. I was like, do you remember what it was about? Or like, I was like, I don't know.
Was I referencing something in the news?
She was like, well, it was my Poems of Place workshop. And I was like, yeah, I remember the workshop. I do. I was like, I don't remember what I wrote. I found it and I read it, and I was like, I don't even remember writing this. Like, I'm just not focused on my own work right now, which is unfortunate, because I have like a finished manuscript sitting over there. I'm always like, it's over there, it's in a folder.
Over yonder. Yeah. You're gonna get that thing. You're gonna get that thing at home. I know you will. It's not
someday. I have to. No. You have to submit it. You have to try. I'm not trying very much. It's not that I'm not trying very hard. I'm trying very, very hard to just exist. But
you're the CEO. It's hard to jet set when you're doing the CEO stuff. I also kind of, because I'm always fascinated by this stuff when I talk to people. You can hop in your Wayback Machine of choice, become like my catchphrase, and I want to see or hear like when you were younger, and like I don't even know if you're originally from California, what kind of, how you got exposed to either like open mics or just poetry in general. Was it somebody who maybe like gifted you a book, or somebody that was like, oh my gosh, you got to come down to this coffee shop and check this thing out? So do you kind of remember those first kind of like dipping your toe in the water kind of things?
It's so funny because I have such a weird come to poetry story, you know?
Poetry.
I do. I started writing. Yeah, it's like come to Jesus. It's like come to poetry. My friend always says poetry is his church. I'm like, yeah, it's like that. I started writing poetry when I was very, very little. I was like third grade-ish, somewhere around there. I had a learning disability. I couldn't read. I could not write a word in English. I did not know because my disability is around phonetics. So like I couldn't sound out words. So I couldn't remember how to spell them. I didn't know how to sound them out. It was all like, I don't know. For some reason, I started writing poems. So that's weird. I don't remember who first introduced me to the idea of a poem either. It just was something I just kind of like this. And so I found like writings and stuff, and it's really fun to decipher. It's like in another language, really, but they were definitely poems. And I've been obsessed with it my whole life. When I was growing up in school, everyone knew Danielle was the writer. I was always writing things. I was writing stories and poems and just obsessed with it. So I decided to go to college for creative writing. That was like my thing. I was going to go study writing at college. And at the time, one of the only undergraduate programs in California for creative writing was at the University of Redlands. Now they're all over, but at the time there was only like two, and that was one of them, two or three. Chapman had a writing program as well, but it wasn't creative. It wasn't creative writing for undergrad. It was a little bit different, but I applied to both of those. And it's funny. I got into Redlands. I don't know if I got into Chapman. I never sent in the application fee. So it's kind of like banking on the one, but like I could have, what's funny is if I had gone to Chapman, I would have discovered the Ugly Mug right away. It's right there. But I went to Redlands and I was very, very, so I work with Poetry Out Loud sometimes, like high school students reciting poems and getting to meet poets and stuff. And it's so exciting. I had none of that exposure. I was writing poems all the way through high school, thinking I was the only living poet because everyone I was reading was dead. And like, I really was very lonely. I'd never been to an open mic. I didn't know anything about spoken word. Like I was just so like insulated in that. So when I went to school, I didn't think I was going to study poetry. I wanted to have a writing career and make money. So I thought I was going to go fiction, right? But then at school, it was like literary fiction, what I always call like the non-genre genre, like a story that's not supposed to have a purpose. Like you get to the end and you're like, what? Like, that. And I was just not interested. I was like, what was the point of this? I don't. So I was like, no. So I decided to go with poetry. So I went again through all 4 years of college before I'd never been to an open mic all 4 years of college because they didn't talk about it very much. I remember though, at the end of school, they were like, okay, you wrote a thesis, you have like a poem, like almost like a manuscript, like a chapbook manuscript of poems. And now you're going to read it in front of 400 people. And I was like, how? Right? Like, and they gave us no training. There was no,
just threw you out there in the middle of the Coliseum. Yeah.
Oh yeah. They were like, sink or swim, you'll figure it out on stage for the first time ever reading ever in front of all of your friends, family, and professors. I was like, oh God, I was so afraid. And so when I left college and then I discovered like, oh, there's poets everywhere and there's poetry open mics everywhere. And this has all been happening all along. And meanwhile, I paid $42,000 a year to not be told about any of this. Like, I was really resentful of that. I was like, what happened? What did I just do? So I had all this formal training and craft and reading and books and stuff, but I didn't know how to perform. I didn't know about other poets in my community. And that's when I ended up moving to Huntington Beach after school. And that's when I started coming to the Ugly Mug and places in Long Beach and going to write bloody shows and all of that. And I started to like really wake up. I feel like that's really when I was born, like as a poet, and to realize that like I was part of a big community and I was part of a long tradition. I just didn't know about it for many years.
Yeah, unless somebody opens the door and lets you in, how are you going to know the door is even there? One thing I was going to ask you, because I always love hearing stuff about this, about learning the mechanics of the performing, but also like for me, I think I got kind of drawn in from songwriters I admired and great lyrics and things like that. So I did that really embarrassing like couplets rhyming, and then trying to get up at open mics, and people were like, "Fuck's sake." And then I always want to know too, like, did you know by going to readings or being told by people like how to break out of that poet's affectation, the over enunciation, the thing where it's just, it's like, dude, nobody is dying on a stage. Like it just the overacting of it, like, because when I was 20 something or 7 years ago, first getting into stuff, I remember going people, and I'm going like yeah. And I'm somebody who also has nervous energy, and I improvise a lot and stuff, but just seeing people going, so far over the top, like at a 25, I'm like, let's bring it down to like a 9,
Right. They're
like
like, quaff the raven nevermore. You're
I,
like,
yeah, I even wrote like
what?
I remember I think I read it at Rick Lupert's reading like 10 or 15 years ago, but it was called like Oh Leaf, and it was kind of making fun of classic literature and that kind of stuff, but also just that over like Oh Leaf, how your swirling descent is a metaphor for my soul. And I'm just like, people get it, and it's just like, what the actual fuck? It's like, come on. And I'm guilty of that too, where it was just like starting out and everything was just like big and like I'm gonna take over the stage and like, oh, because I come from a performing background, and now I'm just like, I gotta just get that into like a 8.5 by 11.
Gosh, it's a great question, Eric, because like I have so many different like moments and things are flying at me. I'm like, how much time do we have? Can we talk about this for 2 hours? Because it's so yummy. It's like a juicy topic. I remember when I was still in college, and again, didn't really know about poetry readings, had never performed. I was working with you had to pick a thesis advisor, and I had a very contentious relationship with like the one professor who was there to be like, because there was two, but the other one was on sabbatical, so I had to work with someone. I was like, we didn't really get along. So I found out that a literature professor I worked for had a husband who was a language poet from San Francisco, who was living in the same town as, because they had just moved there, and he was like not teaching on campus, but he was a very well-known poet from San Francisco. And I was like, can I work with him? So I got like special permission to have this other poet who just lived in Redlands. Eventually he became an adjunct and then faculty there, which of course he should have been, but for a while. So I got to work with him. His name was Ted Pearson. It was amazing. So I go meet Ted. Ted was like a poet, like real. He was real.
Not
And I
just
would give
like
him
a writer, but you're making me think of somebody with like the beret and like the mime shirt
well,
and like
not
the
the
cigarette
beret.
on
No,
the
okay, but he like, this is the thing. I give like a stack of papers, this is, oh God, this is unopened mail, but you get the idea. Like it's my stack of poems, my manuscript, like I give them to Ted. He would take them and he would create what he called, his editing process was creating these X poems. He'd literally take my work, cut it down. Like I give him a 20 line poem, and he'd come back with 2 lines. He's like, here's your poem. And he would be like, rewrite it from that. Or if there's nothing to add, don't add anything to it. That's the only part of the whole thing that was a poem. And I was like, mind explode emoji. Like, what? But the thing about it was that he'd hand me back this physical stack of papers, and the paper would smell like coffee and cigars. How did he do that? It was not stained. I don't know how the
Oh my
paper
God, it just
smelled like
it with
coffee.
pores.
Like it just was in the paper, and I would literally,
Here
so
you
that's
go,
me.
kid.
I thought he was so cool. I would just be like sniffing the paper, like, oh, it smells like a poet, like a real poet, like,
Oh God, bad liver and everything.
right? It was amazing. So I had, but my point was that Ted said to me once, he was like, who are you, Danielle? And I'm like, oh, I'm 20. I don't know how to answer that question. He was like, you write like you're an old, dead literary figure, like old, dead white
Okay,
man
yeah,
energy. And
I
he
see
was like,
that.
you
I can see
need
that.
to,
Yeah.
yeah, he's like, use your voice like you are a 20 something girl from Southern California. And he's like, and write about what you care. You know what I mean? Because I was so obsessed with like literary illusions and all of that. Like you're saying at the open mic, I was doing that on the page too. And he was like, just be real and write like you in your voice, who you are. And I had never been given permission to do that before. I didn't know that I could. Seems silly to say now, but I really didn't know I could write a poem about Tinder or what, I mean, Tinder didn't exist back then, but you know, nowadays I've written so many poems about Tinder, you know, it's like, it's funny to think. So I carried that with me. I really, really took that to heart. And when I started performing at open mics, I was like, I'm going to be as real as I can. And it definitely took a while to learn. I think practice is a huge part of that. Just practice, practice, practice.
Very cool, very cool. And believe it or not, we're down to like the last 8 minutes. So I want to make sure we get a couple of things in here. But yeah, so I wanted to kind of talk to you about open mic experiences, but maybe not so much like locally, but I'm pretty sure you've been around to other cities to have readings, you know, when your book came out and things like that. So I just want to know, juxtaposed, like you were talking about San Francisco, like I had a few times I went up to San Francisco to read, and I had a great experience there because I thought they are just like such a well-informed, like hungry audience for like new creativity, because it's just so nice to go into a place and, you know, turn your phone off and just have the ringer off and just be focused on literally what's happening, rather than people like giving a running commentary like as they're watching something. So do you have experiences like that in performing your work in other cities, and do you like have to adapt if they don't know you if you're going someplace for the first time?
That's so interesting. I love that feeling when you go into like a new venue for the first time and I have this experience where like I'm coming up to the mic and people are looking at me. You said dress casual. I'm like, this is as casual as like, you know, I'm like, and they're expecting one kind of experience, like just from, they're like, well, this is what's, and then to see their faces when you know you're changing their minds about you, like as it's going and they're laughing or whatever. And they're like, oh, wow, this is not what I expected to hear from this person on the mic. That's one of my favorite experiences. But I have to say that like when I was younger, I remember once I wasn't featured at this point at all, but I was like at an open mic in New York at one of it was called the Louder Arts Project at Bar 13, and like in Manhattan. And my friends ran the space. I was just performing in the open. I was so nervous. And they were like, are you going to read? And I was like, no, no, and not at all. They're like, you're in New York. I was like, not going to do it. And they were like, you should. And these were like amazing stage poets. Like it was just one after the other. And like, oh, and I was like, okay. And I was like, I'm going to memorize a poem. So I'm like in the back by the bathroom trying to memorize. And I was like, just too young to know that, like, I don't do that. Like I need to have the page. I have a terrible memory. So, but I remember performing there and just being so afraid, but then, and not doing very well, but just so glad that I did it. So I think that just that, like I said, practice, 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 going to shows, being bold, being courageous, trying stuff out. Definitely what I always say about performing is like, performing is about exchanging energy. So I get whether I'm doing an open mic or a feature, wherever it is in the world, I start to feel like shaky and anxious before. If I know I'm going to be performing, it's like, it's filling me up. And that's not stage fright. And it's not nerves either, is what I've learned. Because I can get very, very calm on stage. I go up on stage, I do great. But I get this energy starts to fill me up. And what I've realized is that this is a gift. This is like the cosmic forces of the universe. I was just watching his Dark Materials last night. It's dust, whatever it is. Like it's filling you up so that you can give it to your audience. This energy inside you is for them, and you're the conduit for it. So I get all this nervous, anxious energy. I give it out through the mic to the audience. And when I'm done, calm as a tranquil like lake. Like I'm just like I feel, and I love that feeling. In fact, I'm like, put me up first, because then I can just relax and enjoy. Sometimes if I go too early though, I sit there and go, after the relaxation is over, I'm like, what did I say? Like, I'm like,
you know, that poem that you wrote 4 months ago and somebody comes up to you. Since we're running out of time, I did want to kind of give you a couple of minutes if you have a poem you want to read. If you have something handy, if you want to read something, you can. If not, we can, you know, talk about some other stuff. It's up to you.
Well, the best part is I said I was going to prepare some poems for today. and then I forgot because I
Not a worry, not a
so much
worry. We
time.
got like 3 minutes, so no
I
worries.
can't. My book's right there. I can grab my book and read something if you insist, but I
No, no,
don't.
I won't insist. But yeah, for somebody, I guess, let's just go with this. Like, for somebody first starting out, or like they're coming to the poetry lab, via Zoom or something like that, and they're interested in kind of dipping their toe, are there some newer readings that have sprung up since, like the lockdown lifted that you would recommend, like people trying out? Because you and I know about the bigger ones in LA and Orange County, but just in your virtual travels there, what do you guys recommend?
Yeah, entering a poetry community it can be so daunting. It's so scary. I think when you're younger doing it, like when I was 22 and I was like, I'm just going to go. I mean, I went to poetry shows 4 or 5 times a week. We had this cool thing called that poetics calendar.
Oh
G.
yeah,
Murray
I love that
Thomas
thing.
would bring them. You'd
Murray
circle
Thomas.
everything and then you'd go all around town. We don't have that anymore. But still, and also I would say entering a poetry community when you're a little older, a little more scary. You have less capacity to go 5 nights a week, right? But you can still enter. And so right now, my favorite in-person poetry show in the Southern California area is definitely the OC Speakeasy, which is in Anaheim at the House of Blues. It's about once a month or so, and definitely go check it out because it's one of the most the prettiest, fanciest venue. The poets are always excellent. I saw Brian Sonia Wallace, Tracy Kato Kuriyama, and Edwin Bodney there last month. Oh my God, it was fantastic. It's a great open mic too. But other than that, I would say in terms of entering Poetry Lab, we have a series called Brain Trust. It's generative workshops. It's really what it used to be like at the Poetry Lab, those in-person sessions that you went to. And it's a sliding scale. So you can pay anywhere between $4 to $25 to enter. And it's a very kind workshop. It's not about critiquing poems. It's just generative. And that is where we invite people to enter with our community, because it's a great place to write, to get inspired, to meet everybody there, and to begin to feel connected. And I think that's why we go to open mics, and that's why we go to workshops, and why we have this community is because we want to be connected.
Awesome. Well, I will stop you there because believe it or not, we're almost out of time already. I could literally talk to you for hours. But yeah, I just want to let people know, check out the Poetry Lab. Is it poetrylab.com?
Thepoetrylab.com.
So thank you so much for being on here. We will post this up this coming Wednesday, and wish you nothing but the best and have a great rest of your weekend.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.